Paris's International Economic Summit's doors had opened. As delegates in tuxedos and suits streamed through the VIP entrance, security yelled "Staff entrance on the right" to Ibrahim Traoré, who arrived in a simple brown jacket. Western delegates chuckled as they passed by. None of them could have guessed that 17 minutes later, that room would fall into ice-cold silence, and that simple African's single sentence would remove billions of dollars worth of deals from the table. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble steps of Le Grand Palais. Limousines lined the street, their polished surfaces reflecting the early light. Flags from over 50 nations fluttered in the gentle breeze. This was no ordinary conference. This was the Global Economic Partnership Summit, where the future of international trade would be decided. Security was tight. Men in dark suits with earpieces scanned each arrival carefully. At the main entrance, a red carpet welcomed the world's most powerful economic leaders. Finance ministers, banking executives, and trade representatives arrived in succession, each greeted with handshakes and camera flashes. Among them, French Finance Minister Antoine Dupont stepped out of his car, adjusting his custom-tailored suit. "Everything must be perfect today," he whispered to his assistant. "The African Resource Initiative must be approved without complications." His assistant nodded, clutching a folder with the confidential documents. "All key delegates have been briefed, sir. The voting block is secure." 20 meters away at the side entrance, a different scene was unfolding. Ibrahim Traoré approached the building on foot. He wore a simple brown jacket over a white button-up shirt. No entourage, no security detail, just a worn leather bag slung over his shoulder. His shoes, though clean, had clearly traveled many miles. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. While delegates arrived with teams of advisors, Ibrahim walked alone, his eyes taking in the grandeur of the building with quiet assessment. When he reached the main entrance, a security guard stepped forward, hand raised. "Excuse me, sir. This entrance is for official delegates only." The guard's eyes scanned Ibrahim's simple attire. "Staff and support personnel enter through the side gate." Ibrahim smiled politely. "I understand, but I am President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. I'm a scheduled speaker." The security guard's expression didn't change. "Sir, all delegates have proper credentials and scheduled arrivals. I don't see your name on my list." He pointed toward the smaller entrance around the corner. "Please proceed to the staff entrance for verification." From behind, 3 European delegates approached. They overheard the exchange and exchanged knowing glances. "Another one trying to slip in," one whispered, just loud enough to be heard. Another chuckled. "They always think they can bypass protocol." The third, a tall Norwegian banking executive, simply shook his head with a smirk as they were ushered through the main doors without hesitation. Ibrahim noticed their reactions, but his expression remained unchanged. Without protest, he nodded to the security guard. "I'll check in at the other entrance. Thank you." As he walked away, he heard more laughter. A British delegate arriving just then quipped loudly to his colleagues, "Who let the tour guide in?" The comment drew more chuckles from those nearby. At the side entrance, Ibrahim faced more scrutiny. The credential check was lengthy, phone calls were made, and even after his identity was confirmed, the staff seemed skeptical. A junior coordinator was finally dispatched to escort him in, not the courtesy extended to other world leaders. "We weren't expecting you to arrive like this," the young coordinator said, scanning Ibrahim's simple clothes and solo arrival. Ibrahim smiled. "How else should a president arrive?" The coordinator didn't answer, instead hurriedly leading him through back corridors, rather than the grand main hall where other delegates were networking. Inside the main conference room, the atmosphere was charged with importance. Delegates clustered in groups, speaking in hushed tones. Power dynamics were visible in who spoke to whom, who was introduced to which circle. The room was a carefully orchestrated display of global economic hierarchies. Ibrahim was directed to a seat in the back row, far from the prominent positions reserved for G20 nations. As he sat down, he noticed the empty chairs on either side of him. While other sections were crowded, no one seemed eager to sit near the simply dressed African president. From the front row, French Finance Minister Dupont glanced back, catching sight of Ibrahim. Their eyes met briefly before Dupont turned away, leaning to whisper something to the German representative beside him. Both men looked back again, then smiled to themselves. Ibra. Let them look, Ibrahim thought to himself. Let them assume. Let them underestimate. He reached into his worn leather bag and pulled out a small notebook, not a tablet or laptop like the other delegates, and began writing with a simple pen. His notes were careful, methodical observations of who spoke to whom, which delegates clustered together, what alliances were forming before the formal proceedings even began. The conference began with customary welcomes. The French host took the podium, delivering elegant remarks about global partnership and mutual prosperity. Special acknowledgments were made to the leaders of the G7 nations, to China, to Russia, to Brazil. No mention of Africa, except as a continent ripe for development and in need of guidance. Ibrahim continued taking notes, his expression revealing nothing. Next came the keynote presentation, the unveiling of the African Resource Initiative. On massive screens, colorful graphs displayed projections of resource extraction, investment returns, and development projections. The French finance minister spoke with practiced conviction. This initiative represents a historic opportunity for African nations. Our consortium will invest 40 billion euros in infrastructure development across resource-rich regions, bringing much-needed jobs and technology transfer to local economies. What went unmentioned? The 90-year mineral rights claims, the minimal tax obligations, the absence of environmental remediation requirements. As the presentation concluded, the room erupted in applause. The initiative was framed as benevolence, the developed world extending a helping hand to Africa. Then came the discussion period. Representatives from major economies took turns praising the plan, each emphasizing how their nation's corporations were poised to participate. Ibrahim sat silently, continuing to take notes. His time would come. An hour into the proceedings, almost as an afterthought, the moderator announced, "And now we will hear brief responses from our African partners. We begin with..." There was a slight pause as he adjusted his glasses, clearly unfamiliar with the name. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. The room shifted. Some delegates checked their programs. Others whispered to their neighbors. Who was this again? What country did he represent? As Ibrahim stood and made his way to the podium, the French finance minister glanced at his watch impatiently. The message was clear. This was a formality, a courtesy extension to a minor player, nothing more. The room was already losing focus. Some delegates checked their phones, others began quiet side conversations. The real business was already considered concluded. This was merely ceremonial, letting the Africans feel included before the predetermined agreements were finalized. Ibrahim reached the podium. He wore no microphone, carried no prepared speech. The contrast between him and the previous speakers, with their tablets, prompters, and polished presentations, couldn't have been more striking. He adjusted the microphone and looked out at the room. For a moment, he said nothing, just surveyed the faces before him, many distracted, some already dismissive. Then he spoke, his voice calm, but carrying clearly through the hall. Before I respond to this initiative, I have a question for this assembly. Something in his tone, not angry, not accusatory, but firmly resolved, caused heads to lift. Conversations paused. How many people in this room know the current gold price per ounce? Confusion rippled through the delegates. Was this relevant? What was the point? A few hands raised tentatively. Someone called out, "About 1,009." Ibrahim nodded. "And who can tell me what percentage of global gold reserves are in African soil?" Fewer hands this time. Uncertainty spread. "Approximately 40%, he continued when no one answered. "Now, my final question. Who can tell me what percentage of the profit from African gold remains in African nations? The room fell completely silent. Delegates exchanged uncomfortable glances. No hands raised. Ibrahim let the silence stretch for a moment before delivering the sentence that would change everything. The continent that holds almost half the world's gold reserves retains less than 3% of the wealth it produces. And today, you've presented us with an initiative that would reduce that number to 1.8%. The silence deepened. Every eye was now fixed on the simply dressed man at the podium. I have reviewed your 240-page proposal. On page 187, section 4.3, you outline the new profit distribution structure. For every $100 million in resources extracted, our nations would receive $1.8 million in direct benefits, while assuming 100% of the environmental remediation costs. Murmurs spread through the room. Most delegates hadn't read the full document. They'd relied on executive summaries prepared by the initiative's architects. The French finance minister's face flushed. He hadn't expected anyone to scrutinize those details, certainly not publicly. Ibrahim continued, his voice still measured but gaining intensity. This room represents over $50 trillion in global capital. You arrive in private jets to discuss how to best extract resources from nations where children still die from preventable diseases. You speak of partnership, but your documents reveal extraction. You talk of development, but you offer exploitation with a new name. He turned a page in his small notebook. Let me offer you a different initiative. For the next 7 minutes, Ibrahim outlined an alternative approach. One where resource contracts required 40% local ownership, where profits were taxed at rates comparable to European standards, where environmental protections were not optional. As he spoke, phones emerged, not in boredom now, but to record his words. Journalists who had been half asleep in the back perked up, sensing a story unfolding. The French finance minister whispered urgently to his aides. Ibrahim concluded, Burkina Faso is a small nation, but we stand today for a principle bigger than our borders. We will no longer accept agreements that treat our resources as your birthright and our people as your labor force. The old model of exploitation is over. He closed his notebook. Thank you for your time. Burkina Faso respectfully declines to participate in the African Resource Initiative as currently structured. With that, he stepped away from the podium and walked back to his seat. The room remained frozen in stunned silence. Then, from the middle section, a delegate from Kenya stood up. Kenya also declines. Next, a representative from Mali. Mali declines. Then Ghana, Senegal, Cameroon, one by one, African nations that had been expected to quietly accept the initiative, were publicly withdrawing. The French finance minister rushed to the podium, trying to regain control of the room. Perhaps we've had a misunderstanding. The initiative is flexible, open to adjustments. But it was too late. The carefully constructed facade had cracked. Journalists were already filing reports about the unexpected rebellion. African delegates, who had arrived feeling obligated to accept whatever was offered, were now clustering around Ibrahim. Their expressions transformed from resignation to resolve. Camera flashes illuminated the room like lightning strikes. A journalist from an international news agency pushed forward through the crowd. President Traore, was this coordinated beforehand? Did African nations plan this rejection? She asked, microphone extended. Ibrahim shook his head. Truth needs no coordination. Each nation has simply recognized what has been in front of us all along. The response spread across social media within minutes. Ancient truth needs. No coordination began trending globally. In another corner of the room, European and American delegates huddled in emergency discussions. Their carefully planned initiative, months in the making, with billions in potential profits already factored into quarterly projections, was unraveling before their eyes. We need to offer concessions, one whispered urgently. If we give in to Burkina Faso, we'll have to renegotiate with all of them, another replied. Then what do you suggest? Asked a third. We need those resources. The stark reality was settling in. For decades, they had negotiated from a position of assumed power. That power was now visibly shifting. Meanwhile, delegates from China and Russia watched with calculated interest. New opportunities were emerging from the chaos, perhaps new partnerships that bypassed Western intermediaries altogether. In the confusion, a Belgian trade minister approached Ibrahim. "That was quite a performance, he said, his tone both impressed and concerned. "But be realistic. Your countries need our investment. Where else will you get the capital for development?" Ibrahim looked at him steadily. "Perhaps the better question is, where will you get resources when we negotiate as equals? The world is changing, Minister. Today is just the beginning." As the summit dissolved into emergency meetings and hastily revised strategies, the security guard from the entrance approached Ibrahim with visible embarrassment. "Mr. President, I want to apologize for this morning's misunderstanding." Ibrahim smiled and shook the man's hand. "No apology needed. Sometimes it's an advantage to be underestimated." Outside the conference hall, a crowd had gathered. Word had spread about what was happening inside. African students from Paris universities held hastily made signs: "Resources exploitation" and "Respect not charity." Their cheers erupted when Ibrahim emerged from the building. One young woman pushed forward through the crowd. "President Traore, my parents are from Burkina Faso. I'm studying economics here in Paris." Her voice trembled with emotion. "Today, for the first time, I felt proud in front of my classmates." "Thank you." Ibrahim paused to shake her hand. "Your education is the most valuable resource of all. Use it well for our people." Nearby, executives from several mining corporations watched the scene with concern, speaking urgently into their phones. Stock prices were already responding to the news. One company that had heavily invested in the initiative saw its shares drop 17% in a single hour. Back at his modest hotel, not the 5-star accommodation offered to summit delegates, but a simple 3-star establishment he'd chosen himself, Ibrahim found a message waiting. It was from the President of South Africa, requesting an urgent call. "What you started today," the South African president told him when they connected, "has been long overdue. We've been giving away our continent's wealth for generations. It's time for a new approach." Ibrahim spent the evening taking calls from leaders across Africa. What had begun as a solitary stand was rapidly becoming a continental movement. In the days that followed, the summit's collapse dominated international headlines. Financial markets adjusted to the new reality. African resources would no longer come at colonial-era discounts. A week later, Ibrahim addressed his nation from Ouagadougou. The speech was broadcast across Burkina Faso, with people gathering around radios and televisions to hear his words. "We did not reject partnership," he explained. "We rejected exploitation, disguised as partnership. And in doing so, we have opened the door to true cooperation based on mutual respect." He announced new resource governance standards that would be applied to all existing and future contracts. Companies would need to adapt or leave, but surprisingly, many chose to adapt. The terms were still profitable, just not exploitative. What began with laughter ended with respect. The simply dressed man they had mistaken for a nobody had rewritten the rules of global resource politics in 17 minutes. And Ibrahim Traoré, sitting quietly in his office, reviewing proposals from countries now eager to negotiate on equal terms, knew that today was just the first step in a longer journey toward true economic sovereignty, not just for Burkina Faso, but for a continent tired of being wealthy in resources yet poor in power.